You've found the Stealth Podcast. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Subscribe and comment to support us. Thanks. Let's begin. Let me tell you about the night my van broke down outside Stillwater, Oklahoma. I was on a cross-country trip when my engine died on a desolate stretch of road. With no cell service and night falling fast, I had no choice but to walk to the only house visible in the distance. The family that lived there seemed helpful at first, welcoming me in, offering to help with my van in the morning. But as the night wore on, their behavior became increasingly erratic and disturbing. What started as an unfortunate breakdown quickly turned into a desperate fight for survival against people who weren't what they seemed. By morning, I would discover the horrifying truth about the house and its inhabitants, and why no one who stops there ever leaves. My name is Nora Blackwell. I am 29 years old, and I lived in Portland before trading my apartment for a renovated 1978 Volkswagen bus painted a cheerful shade of teal. I'd been on the road for almost a year, documenting my travels on a moderately successful blog. The freedom was intoxicating, waking up to different horizons, meeting fellow nomads, and experiencing America one backroad at a time. I was passing through Oklahoma on my way to a van meetup in Arkansas when everything went wrong. The trouble started just outside Stillwater as the sun was beginning to set. I was driving down a county road that my GPS swore was a shortcut when my engine made a sputtering sound followed by an ominous clunk. Black smoke billowed from under the hood as the van slowed to a crawl before dying completely. I coasted to the shoulder, a sinking feeling in my stomach as I realized how isolated this stretch of road was. Nothing but farmland and rolling hills as far as I could see. I tried starting the engine again, nothing but a sad clicking sound. My phone showed no service bars, and the fading light cast long shadows across the landscape. I popped the hood and was greeted by more smoke, the acrid smell making me cough. Whatever had happened was beyond my limited mechanical knowledge. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night approached, and even though it was late spring, the Oklahoma nights could still get chilly. I grabbed my flashlight and jacket from the van and decided to look for help. In the distance, maybe half a mile down the road, I could see the faint outline of what looked like a farmhouse, the only sign of human habitation visible in any direction. With no other options, I locked my van and started walking. The road was gravel, kicking up dust with every step, and oddly quiet. No crickets, no distant traffic sounds, just the crunch of stones beneath my boots and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. The farmhouse grew slowly larger as I approached, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch and a single light glowing from a downstairs window. As I got closer, I could make out more details: peeling white paint, a weather vane tilted at an odd angle, and a rusted pickup truck parked to the side. Normal enough, but something about the place made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe it was the way the house seemed to absorb the darkness around it rather than repel it. Still, I needed help, and this was my only option. I walked up the creaking steps to the porch and, after a moment's hesitation, knocked firmly on the door. The door opened almost immediately, as if someone had been standing right behind it, waiting. A man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and deeply tanned, weathered skin stood in the doorway. He wore overalls and a flannel shirt despite the season, and his eyes, pale blue and strangely bright, studied me with an intensity that made me take a half step back. "Well now," he said, his voice friendlier than his gaze. "Don't often get visitors out this way after dark." "Something wrong, miss?" I explained my situation as concisely as possible. The broken down van, the lack of cell service, the need for help or at least a phone to call a tow truck. As I spoke, a woman appeared behind him, wiping her hands on an apron. She was thin to the point of gauntness, with long gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she had the same unervingly bright eyes as the man. "Gerald," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic, "invite the poor girl in. It's getting cold out there." Gerald stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The interior of the farmhouse was like stepping back in time. Doilies on antique furniture, faded wallpaper, and the smell of something cooking that I couldn't quite identify, sweet, but with an underlying scent that turned my stomach slightly. "Our phone line's been down since the storm last week," Gerald said as he led me into his sitting room. And the nearest tow service is in Stillwater proper. Wouldn't come out this far at night anyhow. You'll have to wait till morning, I'm afraid." The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, nodded in agreement. "You'll stay for dinner and spend the night?" she said. It wasn't a question. A loud thump from upstairs made me flinch. Martha and Gerald exchanged a quick glance before Martha smiled thinly. "That's just our boy, Elijah," she explained. "He's sensitive to strangers. Best if you don't mind him." Another thump, followed by what sounded like scratching. "I'll go settle him down," Gerald said, heading for the stairs. As he left, I noticed a framed photograph on the mantel. A family portrait showing Gerald, Martha, and a young boy with the same pale eyes. The photo looked decades old, the colors faded to sepia tones. Martha gestured for me to sit at a dining table already set for for places. Had they been expecting company? "You're just in time for dinner," she said, disappearing into the kitchen. I sat, uncomfortable but lacking alternatives. On the wall across from me hung several crude drawings done in what looked like crayon, stick figures in a field, a house with smoke rising from the chimney, and what might have been animals but were drawn with too many legs. Children's drawings, but something about them made my skin crawl. The scratching sound from upstairs had stopped, but now I could hear whispering. Too faint to make out words, but unmistakably human. Dinner was a tense affair. Martha served some kind of stew that smelled appetizing enough, but the meat had a strange texture I couldn't identify. Gerald returned downstairs alone, explaining that Elijah isn't feeling sociable tonight. Throughout the meal, they asked me questions about my travels, my van, how long I'd been on the road. Normal enough topics, but there was an intensity to their interest that felt off. They seemed particularly fixated on whether anyone knew where I was or was expecting to hear from me. "No one to worry if you don't check in tonight, then?" Gerald asked, spooning more stew onto my plate despite my protest that I was full. As we ate, I became aware of a presence, a sensation of being watched from the darkened hallway behind me. Twice I turned to look, only to see nothing but shadows. The third time, I caught a glimpse of movement, something ducking back into the darkness. "Did you see something interesting, dear?" Martha asked, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. I mumbled something about thinking I'd heard a noise. "Old houses make all sorts of sounds," Gerald said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Especially at night." After dinner, Martha showed me to a bedroom on the second floor. "You'll be comfortable here," she said, lighting an oil lamp beside the bed. The room was small and sparsely furnished, a narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a rocking chair by the window. The wallpaper was faded floral patterns, peeling in the corners, and the floorboards creaked with every step. "The bathroom's down the hall," Martha continued, "but I wouldn't wander around after dark. The stairs can be tricky, and Elijah, well, he doesn't like to be disturbed." I thanked her, and she left, closing the door behind her. As soon as her footsteps receded, I tried the handle. Not locked, at least not yet. I moved to the window and looked out at the moonlit countryside. My van was barely visible in the distance, a tiny speck on the road. I could make a run for it, sleep in the van instead, but something told me that would be a mistake. Better to wait until morning, when I could politely thank them for their hospitality and leave. I sat on the edge of the bed, which creaked loudly under even my slight weight. That's when I noticed the scratches on the inside of the door, long, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone had tried to claw their way out, or maybe to keep something from getting in. And there, almost hidden by the bedside table, was a small scrap of paper. I picked it up and felt my blood run cold as I read the hastily scrawled message. "Get out. They won't let you leave." The handwriting was jagged, desperate, written by someone in a hurry, or perhaps by a child. Elijah? But Gerald and Martha had talked about him as if he were still young, and that family photo looked decades old. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind outside, had me sitting bolt upright, straining to listen. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that paused outside my door. The handle turned slightly, then stopped as if the person on the other side had changed their mind. The footsteps continued down the hall. A door opened and closed. Then silence. I waited for what felt like hours, clutching my small pocket knife, a woefully inadequate weapon, but better than nothing. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me because I jerked awake to the sound of scratching, not at my door this time, but at my window. I froze, watching as a pale hand with unnaturally long fingers scraped against the glass. The hand retreated, replaced by a face peering in, a young boy's face, but wrong somehow, the proportions distorted, the eyes too large and too bright in the moonlight. Elijah? The face disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I scrambled off the bed, heart pounding, and pressed myself against the wall beside the window, out of sight from outside. Dawn was still hours away, but I couldn't stay in this room until morning. I had to get out now. I gathered my courage and opened the door as quietly as possible, wincing at every creak. The hallway was dark except for a faint light coming from downstairs. I crept toward the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the floorboards were less likely to betray my movements. Halfway down the hall, I passed a door that was slightly ajar. From inside came a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone rocking in a chair. A child's voice began to sing, so quietly I could barely make out the words. One by one, they come to stay. One by one, they go away. I made it to the staircase and began my descent, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. From the kitchen came the murmur of voices, Gerald and Martha, speaking too low for me to catch what they were saying. I reached the bottom of the stairs and edged toward the front door, now only feet away. Freedom was so close I could taste it. Then a floorboard betrayed me with a loud creak. The voices in the kitchen stopped abruptly. Elijah, Martha called out. Is that you, boy? I lunged for the door, fumbling with the unfamiliar locks. The kitchen door swung open, and there stood Gerald, a large butcher knife in his hand. Now where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice no longer friendly. It's not safe out there at night. All sorts of dangers. Behind him, Martha appeared, holding what looked like rope. We can't let you leave, she said, almost apologetically. Elijah needs you to stay. From upstairs came that same child's voice, no longer singing but laughing, a high, unnatural sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. I finally got the door unlocked and threw it open, ready to run into the night, only to find myself face to face with Elijah. Not a child at all, but something else entirely. What stood before me was nightmare made flesh, a creature with the approximate shape of a child, but wrong in every detail. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ending in curved points that explained the scratches on the door and window. Its face mimicked human features, but seemed to shift and change as I watched, like clay being molded by invisible hands. And its eyes, those same unnaturally bright eyes as Gerald and Martha, glowed with a feverish light. New friend, it said in that childish voice, reaching for me with those terrible hands. I screamed and shoved past it, nearly falling down the porch steps in my haste. Behind me, I heard Gerald shout, "Grab her, Elijah. Don't let her get away." I ran, not toward the road in my van, but across the field behind the house, hoping the tall grass would provide some cover in the moonlight. I could hear them pursuing, Gerald's heavy footsteps, Martha's voice calling out in that eerily melodic tone. "Come back, dear. You can't leave now. You're part of our family." And worst of all, the strange scuttling sound of whatever Elijah truly was as it moved through the grass. The field seemed endless, the grass whipping at my legs as I ran. My lungs burned, and my legs threatened to give out, but terror kept me moving. Then my foot caught on something, and I went down hard, the breath knocked from my body. I scrambled to my knees, ready to run again, then stopped cold as I realized what I had tripped over, a human skull, partially buried in the dirt. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that the ground around me was littered with bones, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, bleached white by the sun and weather. I understood then what happened to travelers who broke down near the old farmhouse, why Gerald and Martha had seemed so practiced at taking in stranded motorists, why they'd asked if anyone would miss me. I was not the first, and if I couldn't escape, I wouldn't be the last. I got to my feet just as Gerald emerged from the grass, the knife glinting in the moonlight. "Now you've seen our little family secret," he said, advancing slowly. "Elijah gets so hungry, you see. Always has, ever since the change. And regular food just doesn't satisfy him anymore." Dawn was breaking as I backed away, the sky lightening to a pale gray. Gerald lunged forward, but his foot caught on the same bone that had tripped me, and he stumbled. I seized the moment and ran again, this time toward the road. I reached my van just as Martha and Elijah emerged from the field. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and threw myself inside, locking it behind me. Through some miracle, the engine started on the first try. Whatever had been wrong with it the night before had apparently resolved itself. As I sped away, I looked in my rearview mirror to see all three of them standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. Elijah raised one distorted hand in what almost seemed like a wave goodbye. I drove straight to the Stillwater police station and told them everything. They were skeptical. Of course, stories of monsters don't fit neatly into police reports. But when I described the location of the farmhouse, the older officer's face went pale. "That property's been abandoned for over 40 years, he said. "Not since the Mercer family disappeared in the 80s, parents and their young son. They sent a patrol car out, but found nothing. No house, no bones in the field, no sign that anyone had lived there for decades. Just the foundation of a farmhouse that had burned down long ago. But I know what I saw. I know what Elijah was. And sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear Martha's melodic voice calling me to come back, to be part of their family forever." Let me share the most disturbing experience of my life. I was traveling through southeastern Oklahoma, looking for some peace and quiet in the forest near Broken Bow Lake. I found a secluded spot to park my van, perfect for a few days of hiking and photography. The first night was peaceful, but on the second day, I discovered an abandoned lookout tower deep in the woods. My curiosity got the better of me, and I climbed to the top to take some photos of the sunset. That's when I saw it through my camera lens, someone watching my van from the trees. When I returned, things inside were slightly moved, but nothing was missing. Each night afterward, the watcher grew bolder, leaving signs they'd been inside while I was away. By the fifth night, I realized with growing horror that they weren't interested in stealing my belongings. They were studying me, learning my habits, waiting for the perfect moment to make me disappear like the other travelers who'd gone missing in these woods. My name is Malik Delaney. I'm 31 years old from Chicago. After burning out from my job in architectural photography, I converted a Mercedes Sprinter and hit the road 8 months ago. The freedom to chase the perfect light anywhere in the country was exactly what my creative spirit needed. I'd been gradually making my way south, documenting small towns and natural wonders for a photo book I was compiling. Oklahoma wasn't originally on my itinerary, but another Vanlifer I met in Arkansas raved about the pristine forests and low tourist numbers around Broken Bow Lake, especially in early spring before the summer crowds arrived. The drive into the Ouachita National Forest was stunning. Towering pines flanking winding roads, glimpses of crystal clear water through the trees, and hardly another vehicle in sight. I'd researched a few dispersed camping spots where I could legally park my van for up to 14 days, well away from the more populated campgrounds. After a couple hours of driving down increasingly narrow forest roads, I found the perfect spot. A small clearing about half a mile from the lake, hidden from the main road by dense vegetation, but with enough open sky above for my solar panels. My first day was blissful isolation, the kind that city dwellers like me dream about. I hiked down to the lakeshore, photographed an osprey diving for fish, and returned to my van as the sun was setting to cook a simple meal on my portable stove. The forest was alive with sound, frogs, crickets, the occasional distant owl, but not a single human voice or engine noise. I slept deeply that night, the kind of rest that only comes when you're far from artificial light and the constant hum of civilization. If only I'd packed up and left the next morning, perhaps everything that followed could have been avoided. I woke early, eager to explore more of the surrounding area. After breakfast, I packed my camera gear, plenty of water, and a lunch I could eat on the trail. According to my map, there were several hiking paths crisscrossing the forest, including one that led to an overlook with views of the lake and mountains beyond. The trail was overgrown in places, suggesting it wasn't frequently used, which only added to the appeal for me. I'd always preferred to capture images that weren't on everyone's Instagram feed. About 3 miles in, the trail forked, with the right path continuing toward the overlook marked on my map. The left fork wasn't indicated at all, but appeared to lead deeper into the forest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took the unmarked path. The forest grew denser, older somehow, with massive trees creating a canopy that dimmed the midday sun to twilight levels. After about 30 minutes of hiking, I came upon something unexpected, an old fire lookout tower rising above the trees. These towers were built across national forests in the early 20th century, but many had been abandoned as aerial surveillance became more common. This one looked like it hadn't been used officially in decades. The wooden stairs were weathered gray, some steps missing entirely, and the metal structure had rusted to a deep orange brown. But someone had been maintaining it, or at least using it. Fresh boot prints marked the ground around the base, and the stairs, while old, seemed sturdy enough. I stood at the base of the tower, debating whether it was safe to climb. My photographer's instinct won out. The view from up there would be spectacular, especially with golden hour approaching. I tested each step carefully as I ascended, camera bag secure on my back. The climb was nerve-wracking, with the entire structure creaking and swaying slightly in the breeze. But after about 5 minutes of careful climbing, I reached the observation cabin at the top. The small room had windows on all sides, many cracked or missing entirely, and the interior was sparse. Just an old metal desk, a broken chair, and what looked like a logbook, its pages yellow with age and water damage. The view was every bit as breathtaking as I'd hoped. I could see for miles in every direction. The glittering surface of Broken Bow Lake to the west, endless rolling forest to the north and east, and the distant silhouette of mountains to the south. I spent nearly an hour photographing the landscape as the sun began its descent, casting everything in that magical golden light photographer's chase. As I was about to pack up my gear, something caught my eye through the telephoto lens, a flash of movement in the direction of my campsite. I adjusted the focus and felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm evening air. Someone was standing at the edge of the clearing where I'd parked my van, partially hidden behind a tree. They appeared to be watching my vehicle. I couldn't make out much detail at this distance, even with the zoom lens, just a figure in dark clothing, unnaturally still. As I watched, they moved from behind the tree and approached my van, circling it slowly before trying the door handle. Finding it locked, they peered through each window methodically, as if taking inventory of what was inside. Then, seeming to sense they were being watched, they looked up, straight in my direction. Even though I knew they couldn't possibly see me at this distance, I instinctively pulled back from my camera. When I looked again a few seconds later, the figure was gone. I hurriedly packed my gear, suddenly aware of how quickly the light was fading and how far I was from my van. The descent from the tower was even more treacherous than the climb up, as darkness was settling over the forest. By the time my feet touched solid ground, I needed my headlamp to see the trail. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf amplified my unease as I hiked back, moving as quickly as I safely could through the gathering darkness. Had I simply seen another hiker? A forest ranger? The rational part of my brain suggested these possibilities, but something more primitive knew better. The methodical way they'd examined my van hadn't been casual curiosity. I reached the main trail junction with relief, now only about a mile from my campsite. The forest felt different at night, watching rather than welcoming. I kept my headlamp on its brightest setting, though this limited my vision to a small cone of light and made the darkness beyond seem even more impenetrable. Several times I paused, certain I'd heard footsteps paralleling mine just off the trail, but when I stopped, the forest fell silent except for the natural chorus of night insects. Just animals, I told myself, just nocturnal wildlife startled by my passage. But the back of my neck prickled with the sensation of being watched, followed. I burst into the clearing where my van was parked with my heart pounding, half expecting to find the stranger waiting for me. The site appeared exactly as I'd left it. Van locked, camp chair folded beside the fire pit, nothing visibly disturbed. I unlocked the vehicle with shaking hands and quickly got inside, securing all the doors before turning on the interior lights. Everything seemed in order, yet something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that things had been moved slightly. My coffee mug was on the wrong side of the sink. A book I thought I'd left on the bed was on the counter. My laptop seemed to be at a different angle than I remembered leaving it. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the hurried night hike and the unsettling sight of someone examining my van had made me imagine discrepancies. I checked that my valuables were still there, camera equipment, laptop, wallet, and finding nothing missing, I forced myself to go through my evening routine. I heated up dinner, though I had little appetite, and tried to distract myself by editing the day's photos. But each sound from the forest outside made me flinch. Was that the wind in the trees or someone moving around my campsite? Sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of being chased through endless woods by a faceless pursuer. I woke before dawn, groggy and unsettled. The rational choice would have been to pack up and find another camping spot, preferably in a more populated area. But something kept me from leaving, a photographer's stubbornness perhaps, not wanting to abandon the perfect location because of what might have been nothing more than another hiker's curiosity. Besides, I told myself, if someone had wanted to break in or harm me, they'd had plenty of opportunity while I was miles away at the lookout tower. I spent the day exploring areas closer to my van, never letting it out of sight for long. I found a beautiful stream with several small waterfalls that kept me occupied photographically for hours. As the day progressed without incident, my anxiety from the previous evening began to recede. By late afternoon, I convinced myself that what I'd seen was probably a park ranger checking to make sure I wasn't camping illegally. When I returned to my van to prepare dinner, however, that comforting rationalization shattered. There, placed precisely in the center of my camp chair, which I distinctly remembered folding and leaning against the van, was a small object, a carved wooden figure, roughly humanoid, but with elongated limbs and an oversized head with deep-cut eyes. The craftsmanship was primitive but unsettling, especially given that someone had clearly been in my campsite while I was nearby at the stream. I looked around the clearing, scanning the treeline for any sign of movement, any hint of who might have left this strange offering. The forest remained still and indifferent to my rising panic. I picked up the figure gingerly, as if it might bite. It was freshly carved. The wood still had a raw smell, and tiny shavings clung to the deep cuts that formed its features. This wasn't something left by previous campers or dropped accidentally by a passing hiker. This was made recently, deliberately, and placed where I would certainly find it. A message of sorts, though its meaning eluded me. That night, I locked myself in my van as soon as darkness fell, the wooden figure placed outside on a rock where I'd found it. Returning it seemed somehow important, as if keeping it might be seen as acceptance of whatever communication it represented. I kept the blinds closed, but positioned myself where I could peer out occasionally through a small gap. Around midnight, a sound jolted me fully awake, the soft but distinct crunch of footsteps on the pine needle-covered ground outside my van. The steps circled the vehicle slowly, pausing near each window. I held my breath, phone in hand with emergency services pre-dialed, though I doubted any help could reach me quickly in this remote location. A shadow passed across my slim viewing gap, briefly blocking the moonlight. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice, gentle tapping on each window, methodical, almost rhythmic. Not the urgent knock of someone needing help or the authoritative rap of law enforcement, but something more intimate and unsettling, like a friend asking to be invited in. I remained absolutely still, not daring to breathe until the tapping stopped and the footsteps receded into the forest. I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night, sitting upright with my back against the wall furthest from the windows, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hand. Dawn brought a false sense of security with its light. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the campsite for any signs of my nighttime visitor. The wooden figure was gone from where I'd left it, but something new had been added to my camp chair, a page torn from a notebook, weighed down with a small stone. On it was a crude drawing of the lookout tower, with a stick figure at the top holding what looked like a camera and another figure at the base, looking up. Below this disturbing illustration were words written in an uneven, childlike scrawl. "I see you seeing me." My hands shook as I crumpled the paper and threw it into the fire pit, setting it ablaze with a match meant for my morning coffee. I should have left immediately. Every instinct screamed for me to pack up and drive away from whatever twisted game was being played. But a combination of stubborn pride, photographer's curiosity, and, I'm ashamed to admit, a spark of anger kept me from fleeing. Who was this person to frighten me away from public land? What right did they have to make me feel unsafe? Instead of leaving, I drove to the nearest ranger station about 40 minutes away, intending to report the incidents. The station was a small cabin with a single truck parked outside. The ranger on duty, a weathered man in his 50s named Callahan, listened to my story with an expression that shifted from polite interest to concern. "Which dispersed site did you say you're at?" he asked when I finished. When I described the location, his face darkened. That clearing off Forest Road 259? About half a mile from the lake. When I nodded, he sighed heavily. We don't assign that area for camping anymore. Not officially on any maps as a no-camping zone, but we steer folks away when they ask. He hesitated before continuing. Had some incidents there over the years. Campers reporting similar experiences to yours. And about 3 years ago, a solo hiker disappeared in that area. Never found a trace, despite extensive searches. He leaned forward. My advice: find another spot. Plenty of safe, beautiful places to camp around Broken Bow. I returned to my campsite with the ranger's warning echoing in my mind, intending to pack up and relocate as he'd suggested. But when I arrived, I found my van door standing open. I was certain I'd locked it before leaving. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously. Nothing appeared to be missing at first glance, but the interior had been methodically rearranged. Every drawer slightly open, items from my storage bins placed neatly on countertops, my clothes laid out on the bed. It wasn't the chaotic disarray of a typical break-in, but something more disturbing, as if someone had been taking inventory, examining each possession with careful attention. On my pillow lay another wooden carving, this one more detailed than the first, clearly depicting a human figure sleeping in what was unmistakably the interior of a van. Next to it was a small, worn leather notebook. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find page after page of entries, the handwriting changing over time as if the journal had been kept for many years by the same person. The entries described visitors to the forest, details of their vehicles, their camping equipment, their habits and routines. With growing horror, I realized I was reading the observations of someone who had been watching travelers in these woods for decades. The most recent entries were about me. Day 1, new van arrived. Solar panels. Man alone. Takes many pictures. Day 2, followed to tower. Watches through big camera. Saw me at his van. Will he leave like the others? And most chillingly, the final entry. Day 3, touched his things. Left my sign. He stays. Different from others. Maybe he understands. Maybe he will join. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me, backing away until I hit the open door of my van. The forest around me suddenly seemed alive with malevolent attention, the sensation of being watched now overwhelming. I threw my essential belongings into a bag, not bothering with the careful packing of my normal routine. As I was about to climb into the driver's seat, a movement at the forest's edge caught my eye. A figure standing perfectly still among the trees, watching me. Not hiding this time, but deliberately visible. The distance and shadows obscured their features, but I could make out unusual proportions. Too tall, too thin, the head slightly too large. Their stillness was unnatural, more like a tree than a human. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then they raised one elongated arm in a gesture that might have been a wave or an invitation to follow. I jumped into my van, started the engine, and sped down the rough forest road without looking back. I didn't stop driving until I reached the interstate hours later, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Broken Bow. I reported everything to the state police, who took my statement with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism. They promised to investigate but warned me that without evidence of an actual crime, there wasn't much they could do about a forest weirdo who likes to carve dolls. They suggested the rearranging of my belongings might have been done by wildlife. Raccoons were known to open unlocked doors and rummage through campers' things. I know what I experienced wasn't the work of raccoons or an eccentric hermit with poor social boundaries. The journal entries haunted me. How many others had been watched, studied, and ultimately joined whatever presence dwelled in those woods? I've since learned that the Broken Bow area has a higher than average rate of missing persons cases, many involving solo hikers or campers who simply vanished without a trace. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed another night. Would I have become another statistic, another mysterious disappearance in the Oklahoma wilderness? Or was I being invited to become something else, something that stands unnaturally still at the forest's edge, watching and waiting for the next traveler seeking solitude in all the wrong places? I never thought I'd end up trapped in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, a place I'd never even heard of until 2 weeks ago. My name is Miles Hargrove. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland where I work as a freelance photographer. Well, live there. Now I'm not sure I'll ever make it back. Let me tell you what happened when my simple plan to document America's forgotten landscapes turned into something that still haunts my nightmares. The summary is this. While traveling through rural Oklahoma in my converted Sprinter van, I stopped at Broken Bow Lake for what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend of photography. Instead, I stumbled upon a local hunting ritual that no outsider was meant to witness. They've been tracking me for days now through the dense Ouachita forests. Hunters who know these woods like the backs of their scarred hands, who whisper about sacrifices to ensure good hunting seasons. They're methodical, patient, and absolutely convinced I need to die. My journey started innocently enough. After 6 months of converting my van, installing solar panels, a compact kitchen, and a surprisingly comfortable bed, I set out on what was meant to be a year-long photography project. The van, which I'd named Nomad, was my pride and joy. Steel blue exterior, cedar paneling inside, and enough battery capacity to power my equipment for days off-grid. I'd already captured stunning landscapes in Colorado and Arkansas before making my way to Oklahoma. When I first pulled into the campground at Broken Bow Lake, I was immediately struck by its beauty. The evening light caught the water in such a way that it seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. I parked Nomad near the southern shore, away from the handful of other campers. The isolation was perfect. I wanted those pristine sunrise shots over the lake. An elderly couple in a nearby RV waved as I set up, and a park ranger named Dalton stopped by to check my permit. He seemed friendly enough, but gave my California plates a long look before walking away. That first night was peaceful. I cooked a simple pasta dinner on my propane stove and edited photos until midnight. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the occasional hoot of an owl. I remember thinking how perfect it all was, the freedom of the open road, the beauty of nature, the solitude. I had no idea that everything was about to change, that the tranquility of Broken Bow was nothing but a carefully maintained facade, hiding something deeply disturbing underneath. I woke before dawn the next morning, eager to catch the sunrise over the lake. As I prepared my camera gear, I noticed a small wooden figurine on my doorstep, a crude, handmade deer with black X's for eyes. I figured some kid had left it as a prank, or maybe it was some local tradition for welcoming visitors. Either way, I set it aside and headed down to the shoreline where the mist was just starting to lift off the water. The shots were incredible, worth waking up at 4:34, but when I returned to Nomad an hour later, something felt off. The van door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it. Inside, nothing was missing, but everything had been touched. My clothes slightly rearranged, my maps unfolded and refolded. Even my toothbrush moved to a different spot. Someone had been through my things with meticulous care. I checked my camera equipment first, thankfully intact, but then noticed my satellite phone was gone. That's when panic first crept in. I was planning to stay 3 more days, but without communication and with clear signs of intrusion, I decided to leave immediately. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking as I stowed my gear. Just as I was about to drive away, Dalton the park ranger approached again. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I mumbled something about a family emergency, not wanting to accuse anyone without proof. He nodded slowly, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Shame you have to miss the gathering tonight. We don't get many photographers around these parts." I hadn't told him I was a photographer. As he walked away, I noticed 3 more rangers watching from the tree line, all standing perfectly still. Their uniforms looked slightly off, too old-fashioned, with strange insignias I didn't recognize. I drove north toward the main highway, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. About 5 miles from the campground, I passed a small church with a hand-painted sign, "Hunter's Blessing, tonight only." Several pickup trucks were parked outside, their beds filled with what looked like hunting equipment, but also chains, cages, and what appeared to be a large meat hook. I drove faster, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. 10 minutes later, my engine sputtered and died. The fuel gauge showed half a tank, but Nomad wouldn't start again no matter what I tried. As darkness began to fall, I started walking along the empty road, hoping to find help or at least cell service. That's when I heard it, the first howl. Not a wolf or coyote, but something mimicking one. Then another answered from the other side of the road. Then another, closer. Soon the forest around me was alive with fake animal calls, sounds made by human throats trying to sound like beasts. When I shined my flashlight into the trees, I caught glimpses of figures wearing antlered headdresses, their faces painted or masked, moving silently between the trunks. I ran back to Nomad and locked myself inside, frantically trying to restart the engine as the calls grew closer and more numerous. The night brought no sleep, only escalating terror. Around midnight, they finally approached Nomad, 7 men and women in those disturbing antlered headdresses, wearing what looked like vintage park ranger uniforms patched with animal hides. They circled my van silently, occasionally tapping the windows with bone-handled knives. Their faces were painted with symbols I didn't recognize, but their eyes remained intensely human, watching my every move through the windows. I huddled in the back of the van, clutching my camera as if it could somehow protect me, documenting what might be my final hours. The outsider has seen our preparations. One of them finally said, a tall woman with gray streaks in her hair and what looked like real deer hooves hanging from her belt. The season won't be bountiful if we let him go. The others murmured in agreement, their voices rising and falling in an almost liturgical cadence. I realized with growing horror that they weren't speaking metaphorically. They genuinely believed my presence had somehow tainted their hunting ritual and that I needed to be dealt with. We need to cleanse the woods of his presence, another said, this one a younger man with a freshly scarred face. The deer won't come if an outsider's scent remains. At dawn, they retreated into the woods, but I knew they hadn't gone far. I tried the engine again, nothing. My phone still showed no service, and my water supply was dwindling fast. Through my windshield, I could see they had arranged those same crude wooden figurines in a semicircle around my van, some now painted red. I had to make a decision, stay in the relative safety of Nomad and slowly run out of supplies, or make a run for it while daylight provided some visibility. The main highway couldn't be more than 10 miles away, I reasoned. If I stuck to the road and moved quickly enough, maybe I could reach it before nightfall. I packed a small bag with water, energy bars, my wallet, and a knife for my kitchen set. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a folded piece of paper had been slipped under my door, a roughly drawn map showing the lake, my location, and a circle marked safe zone about 2 miles east through the forest. Was it a trap or help from some unknown ally? I couldn't be sure, but the road had been watched all night. The forest route, though terrifying, might offer cover and a chance at escape. With shaking hands, I locked Nomad, knowing I might never see my beloved van again, and slipped into the tree line, trying to move as quietly as possible. The forest closed around me immediately, thick and disorienting. I tried to follow the map, using my phone's compass since GPS wasn't working. After about 30 minutes of cautious progress, I found fresh deer tracks and decided to follow them, reasoning that deer would avoid human activity. The tracks led to a small clearing where I discovered something that stopped me cold. A circle of those same figurines surrounding what could only be described as an altar made of twisted branches and antlers. On it lay several photographs of me arriving at Broken Bow, me setting up camp, me sleeping in my van. They'd been watching from the very beginning. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around to see Dalton standing at the edge of the clearing, no longer in his ranger uniform, but dressed in layers of animal hides with that antlered headdress. "You shouldn't have wandered from the path," he said calmly, as if explaining park rules to a careless hiker. "We would have made it quick on the road. Now it has to be the old way." He raised a hand, and I realized with sickening clarity that the others were already positioned around the clearing. They'd herded me here, like deer to a hunter's blind. I ran, not toward the safe zone on the map which I now knew was a trap, but in the only direction without a visible hunter. The forest became a blur of green and brown as I sprinted between trees, leaped over fallen logs, and crashed through underbrush. My lungs burned and branches whipped my face, drawing blood, but terror kept me moving. Behind me, those fake animal calls started again, signals to coordinate their pursuit. They weren't running. They were walking with purpose, spreading out to cut off escape routes, totally confident in their knowledge of the terrain. I came to a small stream and waded into it, hoping the water might mask my scent or trail, though I knew this wasn't some movie where such tricks reliably worked. After following the stream for what felt like miles, I emerged onto the shore of what had to be Broken Bow Lake again. I'd gone in a circle. Despair threatened to overwhelm me until I spotted something on the water, a small fishing boat with an outboard motor tied to a crude dock. It might be my only chance. I sloshed through the shallows, constantly looking over my shoulder, and reached the boat just as a call that sounded like an elk's bugle echoed across the water. They'd found my trail again. With fumbling fingers, I untied the boat and prayed the motor would start. The first pull did nothing. Second pull, nothing. On the third, it sputtered reluctantly to life. As I steered away from shore, I saw them emerge from the trees. Not just the 7 from last night, but at least 20 people in those same disturbing outfits. They stood watching as I put distance between us, making no attempt to pursue. Their stillness was somehow more terrifying than if they'd raged or threatened. A young boy among them raised what looked like a rifle, but the tall woman from the night before gently pushed the barrel down. They didn't need to shoot. Something in their posture told me they weren't giving up. They were simply adapting their strategy. I was still in their territory, on their lake, and night would come again. I aimed for the opposite shore, where I could see what looked like vacation cabins, signs of normal civilization, and possibly help. The boat's motor coughed and struggled, clearly low on fuel. Halfway across the vast lake, it died completely. As I drifted in the sudden silence, I noticed dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Large fish, or perhaps alligators, circling the boat with unnatural coordination. A flock of crows gathered overhead, following my drifting progress. I used the paddle stored under the seat to continue my journey, muscles screaming with effort, the opposite shore agonizingly slow to approach. As the sun began to set, I finally felt the boat scrape against the rocky shore near the cabins. I stumbled onto land, looking back across the darkening water where pinpricks of light had appeared, torches being carried along the opposite shore, spreading out to surround the lake. The vacation cabins turned out to be seasonal rentals, all empty this early in spring. I broke into one, hoping to find a phone or radio, but the utilities were shut off for the season. Through the window, I could now see at least 30 torches moving around the entire perimeter of the lake. They were everywhere. I was trapped on a peninsula with water on 3 sides and hunters on the 4th. In the dim light, I noticed a set of car keys hanging on a hook by the door with a Ford logo. Searching frantically around the cabins, I found an old F-150 parked behind the largest building, partially hidden under a tarp. The truck started on the first try, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I peeled away from the cabins, bouncing down the dirt access road toward what my phone map showed was a route eventually connecting to the highway. I allowed myself to feel the first flicker of hope. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness as I pushed the old truck as fast as I dared on the uneven road. After about 15 minutes of driving, the trees suddenly opened up to reveal a roadblock. 3 pickup trucks parked across the width of the road, their headlights illuminating a line of figures in those now familiar antlered headdresses. I swerved hard, taking the truck off-road into the forest, branches snapping against the windshield as I crashed through the undergrowth. Something heavy landed on the truck bed. One of them had jumped from an overhanging tree branch. I heard pounding on the roof as I swerved wildly, trying to dislodge my attacker. A hand smashed through the passenger window, grabbing for the steering wheel. Without thinking, I pulled my kitchen knife and stabbed at the arm. There was a howl of pain, and the hand retreated. I kept driving blindly through the trees, the truck's undercarriage screaming in protest. Suddenly, the forest ended and I was airborne. I'd driven off an embankment I hadn't seen in the darkness. The truck hit the ground hard, the airbag exploding in my face with stunning force. Dazed and bleeding, I crawled from the wrecked vehicle, unsure which direction to run. As my vision cleared, I realized I'd crashed directly into a hunting camp, but not my pursuers. Regular hunters, normal people, stared at me in shock as I stumbled into the light of their campfire, babbling about cults and human sacrifice. One of them, a doctor from Tulsa on a weekend trip, treated my injuries while his friend called the police on a satellite phone. The state police arrived 2 hours later. They took my statement with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism. When they escorted me back to Broken Bow Lake the next morning to retrieve my van, Nomad was exactly where I'd left it, but started perfectly on the first try. There was no sign of tampering, no wooden figurines, no evidence of the nightmare I'd experienced. The park rangers they introduced me to were normal uniformed officers who had never heard of anyone named Dalton. The police searched the area where I claimed to have found the altar with my photos. Nothing. They dragged the section of lake where I abandoned the fishing boat. No boat was found. The vacation cabins showed no signs of forced entry, and the owner confirmed no vehicles were missing. The final psychological blow came when we visited the church I'd seen with the hunter's blessing sign. It was abandoned, had been for years, with no sign of recent activity. According to local records, the last service held there was in 1997. The police concluded I'd experienced some kind of breakdown, possibly triggered by isolation and exhaustion from my travels. They suggested I seek psychiatric help and even provided contact information for mental health services in Oklahoma City. No charges were filed for the stolen boat or broken lock, items that apparently never existed. I left Oklahoma immediately, my hands shaking on Nomad's steering wheel all the way to the state line. But sometimes, when I check my camera roll at night, I find images I don't remember taking, blurred photos of antlered figures watching my van from the trees. And occasionally, I'll open a cabinet in Nomad to find a small wooden figurine with X's for eyes, even though I'm certain I threw them all away. I'm going to tell you about the worst night of my life. I was just passing through Tulsa in my converted van when I stopped at a local bar for a drink. I didn't know two men would follow me out and begin stalking me through the city streets. What started as a casual evening turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse, with me as the prey. I tried to escape, to hide, but they always found me. By dawn, I would understand the true meaning of terror. My name is Elliot Mercer. I'm 34 years old, originally from Kansas City. 6 months ago, I gave up my apartment, converted a 2015 Sprinter van, and hit the road. Freedom was what I wanted. No mortgage, no neighbors, just me and the open road. The van wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed: a narrow bed, compact kitchen, and enough solar panels to keep my essentials running. I was passing through Oklahoma on my way to New Mexico when I decided to stop in Tulsa for the night. I found a quiet spot downtown to park for a few hours before sunset. My rule was always to find my sleeping spot before dark, but first, I needed to stretch my legs after 8 hours of driving. The May heat was just starting to break, and downtown Tulsa had a strange energy, not quite bustling, but not dead either. I decided to walk around, maybe find a local spot to grab a beer and dinner before heading to my overnight parking spot near Turkey Mountain. The Rusty Nail was exactly what I was looking for: dark wood interior, decent beer selection, and patrons who minded their own business. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a local IPA and a burger, and scrolled through potential parking spots on my phone. That's when I first noticed them. Two men at the corner table, one with a thick beard and a trucker cap, the other with a sleeve of faded tattoos and sunken eyes. They weren't talking to each other, just staring in my direction. I told myself I was being paranoid. 6 months on the road had made me hyper-aware of my surroundings, a good survival instinct, but also the source of unnecessary anxiety. I finished my beer and paid my tab, giving the bartender a friendly nod before heading back to my van. The cool evening air felt good after the stuffy bar atmosphere. I didn't notice the sound of footsteps behind me until I was halfway down the block. My heart rate quickened as I glanced over my shoulder. The two men from the bar were about 50 feet behind me, walking at the same pace. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed, they slowed. I told myself this was just coincidence. They were probably heading to another bar or back to their cars. But when I made a sudden turn down a side street and they followed, that sinking feeling in my stomach told me this wasn't random. I quickened my pace, making my way through downtown streets that were becoming increasingly unfamiliar. My van was parked 3 blocks away, and every step felt like it was taking me farther rather than closer. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps no longer trying to match mine. They were gaining. I ducked into an alley between 2 buildings, hoping to lose them, but when I emerged on the other side, the bearded man was already there, leaning against a wall, smoking a cigarette. "Nice night for a walk," he said, his voice gravel rough. I nodded and tried to pass, but he shifted his position, blocking my path. "What's your hurry, Vanlifer? We just want to talk." The way he emphasized Vanlifer made my skin crawl. How did he know? Had they been watching me before I entered the bar? My mind raced through possibilities while my eyes darted for an escape route. I heard footsteps behind me and knew the other man had entered the alley. "Your Kansas plates caught our attention," the bearded man continued. "We don't get many outsiders parking downtown this time of year." There was something in his tone that went beyond simple curiosity or territorial posturing. These men weren't just local troublemakers. There was calculation in their movements, in the way they had corralled me away from the main street. I made a split-second decision, feinting left and then darting right, pushing past the bearded man with enough force to knock him off balance. I sprinted down the street, not daring to look back. I could hear shouts behind me, followed by the sound of running footsteps. I turned corner after corner, using the buildings as cover, until I finally reached my van. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, my breathing ragged and my heart threatening to burst from my chest. Through the rearview mirror, I could see them emerge from around the corner, the tattooed one pointing in my direction. I pulled out of the parking spot with a screech of tires, not caring about attracting attention. My only thought was putting distance between me and them. As I merged onto the highway, I glanced in my mirrors again, no sign of pursuit. But the night was just beginning, and the disturbing encounter had left me shaken. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, taking random exits and doubling back, making sure I wasn't being followed. Eventually, I found myself on a quiet stretch of road near Mohawk Park. The parking lot was empty, closed for the night, but I was too wired to care about regulations. I needed a place to calm down and figure out my next move. I pulled into a spot hidden by trees, killed the engine, and tried to steady my breathing. The knock on my window came at exactly 1:17 a.m. I remember checking the time right before it happened. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. I jolted upright from where I'd been sitting at my small fold-out table, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. Through the curtain window, I could make out a silhouette. Then another. They had found me. How had they found me? I had been so careful, taking random turns, checking my mirrors constantly. "We know you're in there, Kansas," came the bearded man's voice, followed by another knock, harder this time. "Open up and we can make this easy." The driver's side door handle jiggled as they tried to open it. Thank God I'd locked it. My mind raced through options. I could start the engine and try to drive away, but they might be blocking the van. I could call the police, but what would I say? That two men were knocking on my van. They hadn't technically done anything illegal yet. The tattooed man's face appeared in the gap between my window curtains. His eyes locked with mine, and he smiled, a predatory grin that sent ice through my veins. "He's awake," he called to his partner. Then to me, "Last chance to open up before we do this the hard way." I heard a metallic sound. Was that a knife against the van's exterior? Or something worse? I scrambled to the driver's seat, hands shaking so badly I could barely grab the keys from my pocket. They must have sensed what I was doing because suddenly there was a tremendous crash as something heavy hit the side of my van, rocking it on its wheels. The bearded man had disappeared from view, but I could hear him at the back doors now, trying to force them open. I jammed the key into the ignition, turned it, and the engine roared to life. I threw the van into drive just as the rear window shattered. The tattooed man had smashed it with something. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning on gravel before catching traction. The van lurched forward, throwing me back against the seat as I sped toward the park exit. In my rearview mirror, I could see the tattooed man picking himself up from where he'd fallen when I drove off. The bearded one was already running toward a dark pickup truck parked nearby. They had followed me here, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a hunt. Headlights appeared behind me as I reached the main road, closing fast. I pushed my van to its limits, the engine protesting as I accelerated past speeds it was never designed to reach. The pickup gained on me easily, its powerful engine designed for exactly this kind of pursuit. I took a sharp turn onto a side road, hoping to lose them, but they were right behind me, their high beams flooding my cabin with harsh light. The first impact came from behind, a hard bump that sent my van fishtailing. I fought to regain control, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The second hit was more deliberate, striking the corner of my van and sending me careening toward the ditch. I overcorrected, the van swaying dangerously as its high center of gravity worked against me. The third hit came just as I was trying to stabilize, a direct hit to my rear bumper that sent me spinning. My van left the road at nearly 60 miles per hour, rolling once before landing on its side in the ditch. Everything inside became a projectile. My belongings, my laptop, dishes from the tiny kitchen, all flying around me as the world spun. The airbag deployed with a bang, slamming into my face and chest. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was hanging sideways in my seat belt, blood dripping from a gash on my forehead. Through the shattered windshield, I could see the pickup had stopped. Two silhouettes emerged, walking unhurriedly toward my overturned van. I fumbled with my seat belt, my movements clumsy from shock and possible concussion. I had to get out before they reached me. The belt finally gave way, and I tumbled onto what had been the passenger side wall of the van. The side door was now above me. I climbed over the center console, using the seats as leverage, and pushed against the door. It wouldn't budge. The frame was too damaged from the rollover. I crawled toward the broken rear window, glass cutting into my palms and knees. I could hear them outside, their voices carrying in the night air. "Check if he's still alive," one said. "If he is, we'll take him to the quarry with the others." Others? My blood ran cold as I realized I wasn't their first victim. How many Vanlifers had they hunted before me? How many had disappeared on these lonely Oklahoma roads, their vans stripped and sold for parts, their bodies never found? I squeezed through the shattered window, cutting my shoulder on a jagged edge, but barely feeling it through the adrenaline. I tumbled into the tall grass of the ditch, hidden momentarily from view. I could hear them at the front of the van now, the bearded one cursing as he tried to peer inside. I had seconds, maybe less. I army crawled through the grass, putting the bulk of the van between me and them, then rose to a crouch and darted toward a line of trees about 50 yards away. "There he goes." The shout came just as I reached the tree line. A gunshot followed, the bullet splintering bark inches from my head. I ran deeper into the woods, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning from exertion and fear. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, closing in. Another shot rang out, wide this time. They were hunting by sound now, unable to see me in the darkness of the woods. I stumbled upon a steep embankment, too steep to climb safely in the dark. I was trapped. Their flashlight beams swept through the trees, getting closer. In desperation, I pressed myself into a hollow beneath a fallen tree, covering myself with leaves and debris. The beams of light passed over my hiding spot once, twice, then stopped. "He's here somewhere," the tattooed man growled. "Nobody gets away from us. You hear that, Kansas?" Nobody. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, barely breathing, leaves and dirt pressed against my face. Eventually, the woods fell silent. Had they given up? Or were they just waiting, knowing I'd have to emerge eventually? As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I finally dared to move. My body was stiff and aching, my cuts burning with infection. I crept back toward the road, staying within the tree line. My van was still there, but the pickup was gone. I approached cautiously, expecting an ambush, but found only the wreckage of my home on wheels. And inside, written in what looked like blood on the remaining intact wall, "We'll find you." I flagged down the first car that passed, a family heading to Tulsa for the day. The police later found my van stripped to the frame, but of the two hunters, there was no sign. They're still out there, looking for their next victim parked in some quiet place, thinking they're safe for the night. I'm writing this from a motel room 3 states away, but I know I'll never feel safe again.